Ethan Lancaster had always been a skeptic. Ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, he scoffed at the believers. As a journalist, he made a living exposing frauds, debunking myths, and dismantling the stories that made small towns shudder. So, when he got a tip about a string of disappearances in the remote town of Ravenswood, New Hampshire, he was intrigued but unsurprised. Another case of hysteria, he figured. But Ravenswood was different. The first night there, he spoke with townsfolk who whispered of strange lights in the sky, eerie mechanical hums that vibrated through the forests, and missing persons who returned days later, changed, hollow-eyed, barely able to speak. Some never returned at all. The town sheriff, a grizzled man named Harlow, handed him a file of unsolved cases dating back nearly a century. "They all say the same thing," Harlow muttered. "Bright light, lost time, nightmares they can't wake from." Ethan remained skeptical, but he couldn't deny the fear in their voices. That night, he drove to one of the supposed hotspots, a lonely stretch of road by Blackwood Pines. He parked, camera ready, scanning the treetops for anything unusual. Hours passed, and just as he was about to give up, a deep, thrumming noise filled the air. The trees trembled. The temperature plummeted. A light. Not just any light. A piercing, unnatural white that swallowed the darkness whole. Ethan tried to move, but his body refused to obey. His fingers locked around the steering wheel in a grip so tight it felt like his bones might snap. The light grew, expanded, consumed him. His mind screamed, but his mouth made no sound. Then, nothing. A flash of images, disjointed and horrific. Cold metal beneath his back. Shadows moving above him, their fingers impossibly long and thin, tipped with instruments that glistened under sterile light. A whirring sound, mechanical and alive. Something pressed against his skull, burning, drilling, unraveling thoughts like tangled thread. He wasn't breathing. Or was he? A mask covered his mouth, forcing air into his lungs in measured intervals. His limbs twitched, but he wasn't in control. He wanted to scream, but no voice came. The figures above him spoke in a language that wasn't sound, but sensation. Words crawled into his brain like insects burrowing deep. Observe. Extract. Reassemble. A scalpel-like tool glided across his forearm. No blood spilled, just a thin, searing line of pain. His skin peeled back, revealing something underneath, something that glowed faintly and pulsed in time with the throbbing in his head. It wasn't human. Then, a blink. He woke up in a field, miles from his car, the sky above him vast and uncaring. His watch was frozen at 2:14 a.m. His camera was gone. The road was nowhere in sight. His body ached as if he had been stretched and reshaped. His clothes smelled of something sharp, metallic, alien. He staggered back into town at dawn, a distant hum still vibrating in his skull. He told himself it was a dream, a trick of the mind. But when he looked in the mirror, he saw fingerprints, long, slender, unnatural, bruised into his skin. Then the nightmares began. At first, they were fragmented, flashes of light, the sound of metal against bone, the sensation of floating. Then they became more vivid. He woke up in strange places with no memory of how he got there. His skin itched, stretched too tight over something beneath. He felt watched even when he was alone. One night, as he lay in bed, paralyzed by sleep but aware, he saw them. Not in dreams, not in memories, but standing over him. The same elongated fingers. The same glistening tools. This time they didn't take him away. They whispered inside his skull, a command pulsing through his veins like liquid fire. "You are ready." Ethan opened his mouth to scream, but what came out was not his voice. It was theirs. He tried to fight it, but his body was no longer his own. His reflection in the mirror twisted, his pupils stretching into obsidian voids, his veins blackened beneath his skin. He felt his consciousness slipping, drowning beneath something vast, something ancient. A new hunger grew inside him. Days passed, and the town of Ravenswood began to notice Ethan's change. His vacant stare, his unnatural stillness. Then the disappearances started again. One by one, people vanished just as they had before. But this time they returned different. Hollow-eyed. Silent. Watching. The town whispered of something spreading, something unseen crawling beneath their skin. The humming in the air grew louder, the cold light appearing more frequently. And Ethan stood among them waiting. Not as a journalist, but as something else entirely.